times 11 makes 121. 11 times 21 makes 231. 233 is prime, divisible by 1. You can also divide it by itself, but I cannot make it rhyme of prime numbers in arithmetic. All but 2 are odd, calculations are riveting. When written on a board, prime numbers fascinating, because I can't divide them by anything except itself and the number 1. I can count up to 1,000 while standing on one leg. I can multiply by 15 while scrambling an egg. I can count the kids who go to school, but not the ones who play the fool, or disgusting ones who drool. But prime is indivisible save by itself and 1. Friday evening, hello, is anyone there? Hi, it's the Samaritans. I'm a friend, how are you? I want you to know I care. My name is Sonia, I'm here, I'm your guide. Please help me, I'm lost, my brain is fried. I don't want to live anymore, I want someone to talk to. Is somebody there? Is someone, anyone, out there who cares? I've been like this for ages, almost 10 years. I can't stand the conflict, the struggle, the pain. The thoughts never go away, make me do things each day, things I don't want to do. I try to stop them by hurting myself. How are you now? Are you alone? Said the calm, friendly voice on the telephone. Do you often have thoughts of harming yourself? Do you often feel like taking your life? I feel anxious and sad, a bit overwhelmed. My thoughts are taking over, controlling the world. My mind is confused, my insides are twisting, churning and turning. I just can't resist them. Every time I give in. Ophelia paused, she sighed again. My brain is on fire, I feel like I'm burning, my stomach is churning, I'm having these sores, I don't know where from. They tell me and scare me, they'll say I'll be harmed. Puts the phone down, lays down her head, dozy and drowsy as she falls asleep on her bed. Saturday morning, drifting in and out of consciousness, all acrid smell matched by the deathly sickening mess. Ophelia's head cushioned on the tiled floor of her toilet, head on the phone, startled, jumped like push-up puppet, standing erect when you press the base. It was Mum, very concerned. Ophelia's face had betrayed it. She pulled herself up, head reeling, gazing the lights spinning on the ceiling. Starting to retch, she reached for a bucket. Feebly she crawled, leaning over the toilet, and vomited. It made her feel worse, but it was a release. Someone else had called the police. The bell rang. Ophelia staggered to the door. She heard a voice ask, "Any more?" But inside, anyone who could mind her. But alas, no one. She was alone. After this blur, just a blur and then nothing. She opened her eyes in long, brief, lit corridor. A doctor in white turned his head toward her as she lay on her side, head reeling, body aching as if kicked, bruised, and she's feeling sick as a dog. The first one was more, I would say, typical OCD, the way you think of OCD when people say they've got OCD, but the one that actually was more close to my OCD was the second one. The second one was very much like the way I feel, like things are reeling, I often vomit, I get like, I jump with a start whenever someone comes in the door or anything like that. I find myself hyper alert. So the second one to me was most dissimilar. So yeah. So when I was in school, I'll start off by saying that I had a physical disability. So I did actually have support in school. I had a helper who would help me between classes, help me in PE, things like that. My OCD started as a form of control because I was having all these procedures and surgeries as a child, and I had no control over anything, because when you're a child, you know, your parents do what the doctors say is the best thing to do. So for me it became a thing of control. What can I control around me, you know, and these little obsessions and picking up little habits that I'd picked up from my grandparents, and they became things to me like touch wood was very, I still do it now, and it's, if I don't touch the wood, I think that something bad may happen. And you know, I have a very controlling nature, and that's definitely the OCD. So in school I would struggle with the regimen of things because it was not in my control, just like nothing else was in my control. So I would often daydream a lot and get told off for not being present. And I would often get very distracted by the outside window, or something else that was going on in the classroom next to me that I could hear, because I'm hypervigilant, hypersensitive. So if I could hear something in the corridor or something somewhere else, that would take my attention more than what the teacher was saying. So I would often get in trouble for not paying attention. I think now they call it hyperacusis. But when I was in school, there wasn't really a diagnosis. I wasn't diagnosed as having OCD and PTSD till I was 12. So it was a lot later, but when I look back now, I definitely had the symptoms a lot earlier. I'd say even from being 5 or 6. I remember things that I would get obsessed with, and things that, if things weren't right, it would really upset me. If things weren't the way I wanted them to be, if my mum had picked out clothes that I didn't want to wear and I wanted to wear something else because they weren't the clothes I wanted to wear, and I would get quite upset about that. So yeah, I'm very hypersensitive. It's like right now I can take in everything around me. Whilst the TV is muted, I can still see that there's images there even though I'm not focused on it. I can hear the cars on the road. I can hear the clicking of your glasses, and sometimes it's more forefront in my mind than what I'm actually doing. But I've grown to manage that and kind of try and shut off, put blinkers on, and it's not always so easy. Like if I'm not in a stressful situation, then I find myself easier, I find it more easier managed. But if I'm in a stressful situation, it's too much. I have to go somewhere quiet. So sometimes I find light to be quite stressful. Like if there's a lot of light coming in, and it can be quite, I don't know, it just seems too much. But I've had a lot of fatigue because of my illness, and light was a very big thing. It would give me migraines. I would find myself having auras, visual auras, and stars in front of my eyes, and that would be very distracting too, because I'd be trying to focus on something and I'd see like colours coming out of things and stars all around me and things like that. I'm not sure if that's a hypersensitivity, but I definitely had some of that too. I wasn't actually put on any medication for it until I was 18. And I was treated initially with just, like general antidepressants, and they didn't really do much for the OCD side of things. It's only, 10 years later when I had my daughter and I had my nervous breakdown because of postnatal depression and PTSD, that I was taken to a mother and baby unit, and that's when they said, there's other medications out there that actually help with, compulsiveness and impulsiveness and all the other things that you suffer with, and then they put me on something called an antipsychotic, and that helped a lot. It helped me manage my OCD. That was very helpful. I was always, with my PTSD especially, I was always very jumpy. So if a teacher walked behind me, I would jump out my skin. If somebody would knock on the door, I'd jump out my skin. If there was certain noises and things, I would find myself quite distressed. Like I would be completely focused on other things, like when's the next surgery, am I going to have to go to doctors? And then if I'd be in a doctor's waiting room, I'd be like, there's a light on and it's flickering, and there's the humming of the the machines in the background, and there's people talking, and it's a lot like that in every setting. So school was with a lot of people didn't understand, so a lot of the kids were quite cruel, which made it a lot harder for me to even function in school, especially high school. High school was a horrific experience. I really did struggle with every aspect of it. I'll first off by saying it stays with you. You never forget it. It's still to this day, going back to modelling and things I love, you still have that doubt in your mind because of the way the bullies treated you. So if anybody's watching that thinks that, if you're bullied, and speak up, because it's not worth hiding it. But the bullies used to take my crutches away, so I couldn't walk after my surgery. So, and they would get physical, and one day I came home from school and I would have bruises all over my back because they found it funny just to hit me in the back during a presentation. They would call me names and throw things at me. And then when they figured out how jumpy I was, they'd purposely try to make me jump, and it was like a fun thing to torment Lauren, and it was horrible. I the teachers didn't do anything because they couldn't control the class. So they would tell them to stop it, but that was as far as it went. In the end, my dad went into the school and he said, this is really affecting my daughter. I fear that she may not be here any longer if this continues. And he said, I want to speak to the head teacher now because this has gone on for too long. I don't want a head of year. I don't want a teacher. I don't want a helper. I want the head teacher and I want him now. And my dad sat down with him and said, how do you think I feel when my daughter comes home and she's in floods and floods of tears because nobody likes her and she's different and they're taking her crutches and, they're hurting her. They're physically hurting her. And the head teacher dealt with it, but it took 3.5 years of bullying before anything was dealt with. From the ages of, when I went to senior school, so from 11 to 15, it was really difficult. I was bullied a little bit in primary school, but I think kids in primary school, you can let them off a little bit more because they're just more ignorant and they're learning new things every day. And I think it's a little bit different in primary school when somebody makes fun of the way you walk because it is just ignorance and it's somebody that's different. So I think in primary school it didn't affect me as much. There was a couple of incidences where I was pushed over because one of the kids found it funny that I fell over. And my dad had gone in and explained what had happened and the kid was made to apologise, and then there was an assembly done about disabilities and things like that, so that there would be more awareness, and that kind of helped a lot. I think education is key in all these situations because I think if a child has never seen someone with a disability before, it's that morbid curiosity, isn't it? And it's different, and so I can forgive the primary school bullies. It's more the secondary school bullies that they were just horrific, and I just think that the lack of empathy and the lack of understanding was just inexcusable. I think, again, the lack of education, I think it would have been better perhaps if somebody would have educated them about the impact of what they were doing. I started high school in 2000. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. It can come about from any kind of trauma. So a lot of people associate PTSD with the army because a lot of people that are serving in the military, they get what's called shell shock syndrome, and it's basically PTSD. So when anybody has heard about it, they think, oh, it's a soldier that's come back from war. A lot of people don't understand that actually it affects anyone and can affect anyone. The trauma can be anything from sexual abuse to medical trauma like myself, or bullying can also cause trauma, or moving to a different country can also cause trauma. So there's a lot of reasons somebody can have PTSD, and really it manifests in lots of different ways for different people, but a lot of the main symptoms are you're hypersensitive to everything, you're hyperstimulated, you always perceive everything as danger, so when you hear sounds it makes you jump. So it's like constantly being on edge. Like when you're nervous and something makes you jump, it's like that feeling constantly. And the main thing of PTSD and having PTSD is learning to manage that in a way where you can actually function in society and function in life, because when you're at that fight or flight all of the time, it's very difficult to live a normal life because you're always on that edge, and it is like a razor edge, so it can be anything can make you jump. And I find that when I'm in comfortable situations it's more manageable, and when I'm outside my comfort zone and doing something new, I find that it's very difficult. And because I can't control the new situation or the new place I'm in, I've never been there before, so for me it's a brand new thing, and with that comes the perceived dangers which you have with PTSD. So for me, I struggle with new situations, but I try my best to conquer that, because I think if I only did what was comfortable, I'd stay here all day every day. Yeah, because of procedures I'd had and because of operations I'd had, and a couple of those operations had gone quite wrong, and there was quite traumatic events that happened, like I was bleeding out, things like that, and I didn't think that it affected me in the moment. I remember it, looking back at it now, and in the moment I didn't think that those scenarios actually affected me. It was only the month later that I started initially with night terrors, and then I developed psychosis. and I would see myself in those situations. It was like being trapped in a dream. I didn't hear voices, but so for example, one of the situations, I'd come back from theatre after having surgery on my leg where they broke my femur, and they'd put pressure pads on because I was bleeding, and it wasn't working and they couldn't get in touch with the surgeon because he was in another surgery, so the nurses took the pressure pads off in front of me, obviously, and they put lots and lots of steri strips on. Now, for people that don't know, steri strips are little bandages about this big and they have lines on them, and they use them for small cuts and things as well. And what they'd done is they'd put about 100 over the scar to try and minimise the bleeding while they could see, one, if it stopped, or two, if they needed to get somebody back in to restitch it. And that to me at the time just seemed like, yeah, it was a bit scary, but it wasn't something that I thought would stay with me forever. However, when I had the night terrors, I would dream that the steri strips were still on me, and then the psychosis, I would see steri strips all over my body. I would see them on people I loved. I would see myself bleeding out. I would see blood when blood wasn't there. I would scratch my body so badly that I'd actually cause myself to bleed, because in those psychotic episodes, I would really truly believe that I was back in that scenario, and I could feel the steri strips and see them, and I would scratch them off, but obviously they weren't there, so I would cause myself quite a lot of harm, and it was quite difficult. And my parents found it quite difficult because at the time, I come from a small town, which doesn't help either, but at the time there wasn't really trauma therapy for children, so there wasn't anything the doctors could suggest was, you know, the way forward to manage the condition. And at the time it was manifesting so frequently, and it kind of became overwhelming to the point where, because steri strips have lines on them, I couldn't look at anything with lines on it. So a blind, I couldn't look at a blind. The lines on a road, I couldn't look at them. Lines on a piece of paper, I couldn't look at them. And they were very triggering for me. So you can imagine in school where you have lines and lines and lines on paper and things like that. I was very triggered at school, and I couldn't function because I was constantly triggered into these episodes where I would see myself straight back to the surgery day where everything went wrong, and I would have to try and manage this whilst trying to do well in school. And thankfully I did do well in school in the end, but I had to go back a year. So I ended up in my brother's year for the final year of high school. But that brought comfort to me because my brother ended up taking a lot of the subjects that I took. So I ended up in a lot of his classes. So I had that support there, and I just felt a lot better in his year, and the kids were far nicer. So, you know, that was like, if I could say the 1 year of high school that really was good for me, that it was probably the year I went back a year. Yeah, I think it's on reflection and a lot of years of trying to understand myself, because there was no trauma therapy, and because everybody associates PTSD with soldiers and nobody really hears of it in children. I think I thought I was just broken, and I didn't really understand where I fit in society or in the world, or I just thought that I was this broken person and it would never get any better. And it took a lot of years for me to figure out what makes me tick, what makes me sad, what triggers these things, and it's a lot of self-reflection and self-growth that allows me to talk about it now, because I understand now. I understand me. It only took me like 18 years, but I understand me now, you know, accepting that it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. I didn't ask to be born with the disabilities. I didn't ask to have the surgeries or anything else, and I certainly didn't ask to be bullied. But when you're in all these situations as a child, I think the child's mind, it's more simple. When you're an adult, you're more complex, your emotions are more complex, but as a child, it's more simple. So when bad things happen, you think that you're bad, you think you did something wrong to deserve it. So I think it took a long time for me to, you know, think, it's not your fault. You didn't do it. You weren't bad. It's not a punishment for something you did. You know, I as a child, I remember Jehovah's Witnesses coming round to the house and them saying that it's my parents' past sin that made me the way I was. But I don't believe that for a minute. I had a Jehovah's Witness actually come here a couple of years ago, and they said the same thing, because they said to me, your disability is brought on by your own sin. And I said, well, it can't be my own sin because I was born with it. So unless I did something in the womb, I can't see where my sin could have caused it. And they said, aha, it's your parents' sin. And I said, I don't believe that either. Because I actually think that, now looking back on things, I think that children like me are precious. They're special. The world needs them. We have so much to offer, so much to give.
Absolutely.
We have so much empathy because we've been through the worst of things. So our empathy is like no other. And, you know, I don't think that we're a punishment to the world. I think that we make it better. We make it a better place. It'd be really boring if everyone was the same. I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. That's what they thought it was, because HSP wasn't really known about back then. So they diagnosed me first with cerebral palsy and did all the surgery, which was supposed to basically help my walking and make things more livable. And then I started to deteriorate, and with cerebral palsy you don't deteriorate, it's brain damage. So what you've got is what you've got. It doesn't get worse. It doesn't get better either, but it doesn't get worse. But I did start to deteriorate after the surgery, and that's when they went back to the drawing board and we said, we think you have hereditary spastic paraplegia, but the problem is we don't have the genetic test for it yet. I've just had a genetic panel done now with the newest ones that they've found, but my consultant really believes that I'm probably the only one with my mutation.
In the world?
Yeah.
Wow, so you're quite unique then.
I am.
It feels special,
it does, it makes me feel really super special. Well, initially, my granddad was a photographer, and he always used to do these little photo shoots with me for a bit of fun, and it was always great fun, but people told me I couldn't model because I was too short, or I had scars, or, you know, I had a disability. I can never walk a runway, you can't walk in heels, you can't do this, you can't do that. So I kind of put it off to one side, and I focused on the photography side of things, like my granddad, and I love photography.
You're a photographer as well?
Yeah. So I did photography first, and then a couple of years ago I was down here and I found that there was an alternative modelling scene, and you didn't have to be, you know, the 6 foot model that didn't have one flow on their body. You could be a person with scars, you could, and actually somebody with scars and somebody at a unique height and like myself, it's actually more wanted in the alternative community. It's like they're looking for people that are unique. So I started out with the alternative modelling of the year competition. I just got courage one day to enter.
Really?
Yeah, I was just looking at things and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. And it was the first thing I'd ever done with modelling. And it had to be postponed because of the pandemic, because we were put down in lockdown number 3 or something. But we did it online, so I cleared everything out of here and we did the runway walk in here, and we filmed it and we sent it off, and then we did the photo shoots. I did the self shoots. I mean, I'm quite lucky because with being a photographer, I can kind of take my own pictures. You know, I have my husband press a button and I just would pose myself and get the lighting right, and then get my husband just to press the button. But it's a really great experience. I met a lot of wonderful, wonderful people from all sorts of backgrounds and talents, and yeah, it was quite an amazing experience. I didn't win, but I don't mind. I'm doing it again this year.